Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Very well, thank you. We're going to talk about an incident that's been going on for a couple years, but it sort of came almost to a climax this week, and it has to do with Chief Petty Officer Gallagher, Eddie Gallagher, because he's been in the news. We actually did a program indirectly about him, what's going on. And he's the Navy SEAL that was reported to be atrocious in the way he was dispensing military justice and how he was treating prisoners. It's sickening to read about it. I mean, we get sick hearing about all the collateral damage and people being killed, and people who defend their own country are the worst people in the world, and we call them, they're the Nazis and everything else. But anyway, a few years ago, it was the incident that we're going to be talking about. It happened in Mosul, and he walks into a place, and this is very general, and you might be able to clarify if I don't get it exactly accurate. He walks into a place like a dispensary, and they had a teenage kid in there, and they were trying to save his life, and they were taking care of him, and he wasn't comatose or anything. And Gallagher walks in, and he decides, I'll take care of him, pulls out a knife and stabs him 20 times or something. I mean, it's just so sick. And then they found out that this Gallagher had killed a teenage girl, for no good reason at all earlier on. So his record is horrible. So he was he was finally arrested for this and went to trial, which is a little bit complex, but he was charged with a list of atrocities that he was doing. And at the last minute, there was a medic who must have been available there. He came in because everybody wanted to save Gallagher because he was a hero. You know how our military are heroes. And he's a Navy SEAL, and so they do this, and they got a medic to confess. He says, he didn't do it, I did it. But he had already had immunity. He was granted immunity. So that's sort of weird, and I think we had our program once on that and talked about it a little bit. But now it came back into the news because just recently they were trying to finalize this, what type of punishment, because they they threw out all the violent stuff, the thing that should have put most people in the prison for life, and they decided they would try him because he had the audacity, or there has to be a stronger word than that. So he decided after he killed that prisoner that he had his picture taken with him, in a proud way. It was almost like he was holding up his deer. It's so sickening. So he finally was prosecuted for that, and he was going to lose his, they aren't stripes, but he was going to lose his pin to show
his trident,
So he was going to lose credibility. He wasn't going to get back into battle again. But and the Navy had a process of working this out, and it was going through the process to trying to find out what the punishment should be, and Trump squelched the whole thing. He's one of our heroes. He's the one that defends our country, and he removed the charges. And he says you will not strip him of his recognition. So it's really tough, situation to accept, because that's part of us. That's our system. But we've always argued the case that this type of foreign policy that we follow tends to bring about some of the worst things in people. War sometimes can bring out some great things of people and real heroic, actions. But this was not very heroic. What that guy did was despicable. And the other thing that really annoyed me when this case was going up in court, Congressman Duncan Hunter came to the rescue. He'd been over there. He said, what's the big deal? Get the guy off. I used to do that myself. I had pictures with the people I've killed. Well, anyway, it makes us sick. We have to take this and turn it around and find something positive in this, because it's much too negative leading up to Thanksgiving. So tell me what we're going to do.
Well, this is sort of the problem when you intervene, and Trump's intervention started way early. In fact, in July, he threatened the military prosecutors. He said, I'm going to take away your badge that you got for this prosecution. He was very, very heavily interventionist. As you point out, he was acquitted. Gallagher was acquitted of the murders, but he was convicted of posing with the corpse. And so that put him before a review board, and that's what's sort of the news this week and why we're talking about it, because there's a review board process to figure out if what he did was sufficient to be kicked out of the Navy SEALs. And that's where Trump, he is the commander-in-chief, he has the ability to do this, but the question is, when you go outside of the normal chain of command in that way, you also, invite some problems. So Trump ordered Esper, the Secretary of Defense, you better ensure that Gallagher does not get kicked out of the SEALs. Well, Esper and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Milley, they wanted the process to be allowed to continue. They understand that for military discipline, et cetera, let's let the review process continue. But then here comes the Navy Secretary, Richard Spencer, and this is where it gets really interesting. So you have sort of everyone going outside of the normal. So he goes around to Trump behind his boss Esper's back and said, "Hey, Mr. President, just let the thing go through. I guarantee you, wink, wink, he won't be stripped of his trident." And then so when Esper finds out that this is what his underling did, he says, "You no longer have my confidence. You went around me straight to the president." So this really is the kind of mess that you create, and Trump created it for himself.
So even if they had done that, there'd be no victory, because people would have to undo anything they believed in. Even the people who were trying to bring about justice in the military courts, they would have had to compromise. And Trump, that was too much compromise for him, so he said, no, that's not the way it's going to be done. And the Secretary of the Navy had to resign over all this.
Yeah.
He probably was forced out by that point.
Yeah.
They said he resigned, and making it look like he just couldn't deal with it anymore, but that was the way they fire people. So this is something that probably happens a lot more than we realize. And I once was told, and it's possible, that 5% of the people who volunteer to go into the military have psychopathic tendencies. And this has to be psychopathic. But that's only half of it. But this obsession with purifying them and justifying them and putting them on a pedestal and thank you for your service, because they, that's over the top. That's, rejecting, a little bit of good common sense. But we can push it back one step further. That is, when we get into wars that have nothing to do with our national defense, and we have all kind of other ramifications of why people are in war and why they get annoyed and why they get tired and why they do things like this. I mean, it happened in Vietnam, too. Just think of the My Lai massacre.
Yeah.
They went nuts and just mowed down innocent people. And this, I think, is a consequence of people not generally exactly what they're there for. And even under the best of circumstances, some of this is going to go on. But it generally, I think, is made worse because the longer people have been over there and gone back and forth, the more they realize this war, just think of how many veterans we've worked with and talked to, that they say it's not worth it, it's not working. And just think, the fact that this was in the Battle of Mosul.
Yeah.
Just think, just the news over in Iraq right now is there's a stirring up. There's
right.
more hostilities there, same in Afghanistan. The policies of failure, why don't they listen? Why don't they look at the record? And why don't they change their foreign policy? And here, I find it a little bit discouraging that some of our alliance with the progressive left, they've sort of given up. In order, for political reasons, they had to go and support Shift and a bunch of other stuff.
And missing the big picture. But I was thinking about this whole thing, and it's not an easy one. It's not easy for us. But one of the things that really struck me in looking at the big picture of what's happened, especially the last week or so, is kind of a general breakdown of military discipline. Of course, the president is the commander-in-chief. He can say, okay, here's what's going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, just because you have the power doesn't mean you should exercise it. And when you exercise it, you do lose some of that power because you have an obligation to the moral authority that goes with that power. And so he sort of stepped outside of where he should be on that. And that kind of let things go loose, I think. And I wonder if maybe he's compensating for his own questionable avoidance of war. There are a lot of the stories about his feet problem, what have you. I didn't go. It makes you wonder if it's some kind of psychological compensation. Remember when he first got in office, I want my generals. They all went around him, and they didn't do a very good job for him. But once that kind of discipline broke down, then the Navy Secretary followed suit, and he broke the discipline, and on it goes. So it's almost like he's creating a bigger problem than he's solving, even though his justification for all this, I have to protect my war fighters. Yeah, there are other things that you have to protect as well.
I have a good suggestion for the president. The best protection is keep him out of any unnecessary wars. And I think he agrees on that to a degree, but he's pressured by the deep state and other people that I have to do a little bit of this. And if he's going to use troops, he said we're coming out of Syria, and yet he's going into Syria. He puts more troops in. So he's he's using a little bit of fibbing to get away with this, and the liberals, now that they're pro-war, that they force him to do it.
Yeah.
The little bit he does, they force him into that. So that's the difficulty. I think you start with a basic principle. You either believe in liberty or you don't. You either believe in a non-interventionist foreign policy or you don't. You either believe in the empire or you don't.
Yeah.
And this idea, well, we believe in a little bit of empire. Oh, we believe in a little bit of inflation with the Federal Reserve, and they'll take care of it. Always a little bit. But it's incremental, and because it always grows. If you start with a little bit of socialism, it ends up eventually, totally bankrupt in different manners. I think we're bankrupt for that similar reason because of our interventions. But I think people are skittish about thinking about anything philosophically pure. But I realize they're not achievable. But I think if you don't have an understanding about what a non-interventionist foreign policy is like and answer the questions, what do you do when bad people are killing each other?
Yeah.
And you can defend that, then you just dragged over here. If you accept the idea that we're a great nation, we believe in American exceptionalism, we believe in our obligation to get over there and be the policeman of the world, we'll just do it a little bit at a time, and we're going to be very careful. You've heard the statement. We're going to be very careful not to have any collateral damage.
Yeah.
We're not going to allow civilians to get killed. But the whole thing is, when you go in so easily, nobody even knows who the military is. They don't have fancy uniforms. They don't have red uniforms.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a bad guy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I turn to a couple people that I've come to rely on this tricky issue, because I have not been in the military and I'm not an expert on the UCMJ, but I turn to Colonel Pat Lang, who I read a lot, and also to Danny Sherson, who's done a lot of writing, former Army officer turned anti-war activist. And Colonel Lang talks about this issue. He says it's a tough call on these pardons because war itself is inherently violent and savage. That's the nature of the beast. But he concludes in a piece that he recently did for his Sic Semper Tyrannis blog, he said, in addition to the immorality of killing the helpless, it is true that soldiers who are allowed to kill or maim unarmed people quickly become unmanageable as individuals or as a force. That's one. And Sherson said that indiscipline and inhumanity start small. Quote, a slap of a prisoner posing for Facebook with trophies, executing just one captive until, entire units go rogue, end quote. And he points out Miley, he points out Abu Ghraib. He also talks a lot about the stuff we did in the Philippines about 100 and some years ago that are really savage. So at the end of the day, Trump protecting his war fighters is not really doing them a great service by allowing this to go unpunished.
Maybe doing a lot of harm because people who have done this, they end up going free, and there's no punishment and no discipline. And even, let's say they were more aggressive and you had somebody in there, look, this is over the top. We have to punish this guy, and they go ahead and punish him. I still think that doesn't solve the problem because the real crime are the leaders of the country are sitting in a chair that didn't go to war. They're chicken hawks, and they're the ones who orchestrate these wars, and nobody talks about them. Are they guilty? I think they're morally guilty. I mean, it's not under the code or anything, but what has gone on in the last 15 years especially, but it's happened a lot of times. I mean, Vietnam, I think you could argue. Where did it started right after World War II. That was a big deal when we decided that we didn't have the responsibility by our own Congress to decide whether we had to go to war. No, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to have a police action. Yeah, and 38,000 Americans die on this police action. We're still engaged in Korea. You know, we've divided up and still divided, and it still goes on. So people should be willing to take a principled stand, realizing they can't reach it, but at least you know where your goals are and what direction. So every decision may either go that way or this way. But if you start and say somebody wants total authoritarianism and we have to have an empire, you know, they start in the middle. We want to keep it right in the middle. It never happens. It always grows. Government will grow if you concede the principle to the government that they should be involved in these certain events, whether they're economic or military.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I was going to say, you know, in conclusion, really. It's easy to focus our scorn on Gallagher, and what he did is horrific if, you know, if everything as it appears. But who really are the other people that share the guilt for these kinds of war crimes? And as you said, a Congress who doesn't really give a damn if they declare war or not, just don't bother us, just go do it. The media, remember when President Trump in 2017 lobbed all those missiles into Syria, and Fareed Zakaria said, I think that Donald Trump became president tonight, you know, a bunch of innocent people killed. The neocons, of course, and the liars, that's probably the same thing. But they also have to share some of the scorn, the military-industrial complex that pushes war. But, you know, the big picture, and you've already said it better than I could, is this great moral bankruptcy of our foreign policy. And that's what it's all about. In a way, we're all guilty, and some of us are trying, but, you know, bankruptcy, moral bankruptcy, our exceptional bankruptcy. I keep mentioning this every day, but I want everyone to have the opportunity to get Dr. Paul's new mini book where he talks a lot about this broader idea of bankruptcy. And we'll have in the description how this can be our gift to you in exchange for you helping support the Ron Paul Institute and the Ron Paul Liberty Report, keep us on the air. And we thank you very much for that.
Very, very good. And, you know, I have been and I am searching, but I think I would like to close on trying to point out that we can get a positive out of this. You know, when I spoke to a lot of crowds in the presidential campaign, I spent probably, you know, a lot of my talks would be an hour long. But the first 45 minutes was telling them what the problems were, you know, like we talk on here, whether it's foreign policy or monetary policy, deficits and all this, or invasion of our privacy. But then I spent the last several minutes, 10, 15 minutes, on the answer. It's not that difficult. It has a lot to do with the good part of America. And I've wondered about that until somebody pointed out, well, the way that works is people want to hear the truth, and if they admit it, then they can go on and accept it, and then they're welcome a positive answer. So for me, I think that that is the way we should do it. We should offer the truth, but we also offer the solution. So we should be very thankful as Thanksgiving season comes in place, because we so far still have our right to speak out, even though it's getting more difficult. And of course, we anticipate a lot of problems. But if you admit the truth, you know what we're facing. And there are more people agreeing with us than ever before. Their voices are not heard, but they're listening, and they'll be there when we have to do something big about it. And I think that time is coming. So I'm looking forward to continuing to do this job the best we can. And I want to thank all the viewers today for tuning in, and hopefully you'll come back to our program soon.